Welcome back to another episode of Is Fitz Happy? I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
We're discussing Chapter 27, Key Island, this week.
On Is Fitz Happy?
On Is Fitz Happy? Yes. Is he happy?
I think he's pretty content at the moment.
Yeah, sitting in his cabin.
With his boy.
Yep.
His dog. Starling every once in a while.
Yeah, just fishing and hunting and going to stare off of a cliff.
Writing things down for Jade.
Burning things that he wrote down for Jade.
Yeah.
Well, Key Island is the name of this chapter, and as it kind of says, we are with the crew of the Paragon. We are with, I think, Paragon first, actually, his point of view first here. And he is navigating towards them. They're not going very smoothly or elegantly because they're damaged. The crew is understaffed at the moment, but they are sailing towards this goal here. And Amber, with permission to kind of reshape Paragon's figurehead, and they're connecting at the last chapter that we had with them, she went through a flurry of work to kind of mark out what she was going to do and where she was going to carve. But Paragon eventually is like, hey, hold it for now. Set it aside until more essential tasks are finished first. So the ship sailed blind for now, and yet not blind, for Amber's eyes were his. Through her bare hands, she conveyed to him the feel of the islands they passed. It was not sight, but it was her sense of the ocean and the scattered islands that she shared with him. In return, he shared with her. The white serpent paced them and urged the ship on his own mad way. Paragon suspected that he sought to awaken the dragons in him, but they were already awake and stirring more strongly every day. Their thoughts mingled with his. The dragons reached through him to Amber, changing him as they did so. They were becoming him, and he was becoming them. "We fly," Amber murmured. Eyes wide, she stared ahead, and with him dreamed these islands as once he had seen them. "Once I flew. But these were not islands then, but mountain tops. The great inner wall we called the first range. Beyond it were the lowlands, and then the sea mountains, a restless and rumbling place. Some of the mountains smoked and spat and vomited liquid stone, turning summer to winter and day to dusk. Now they are drowned. The tops of the sea mountains are what you call the Shield Wall, and Old Woman Island, and the like. These islands thread are the sunken heights of the great inner wall." We get a little bit of a pre-cataclysm geography there, and that's pretty much all we get, besides Tintaglia's also notation that the whole world had sunk a little bit.
Right. And the serpents, because they talked about having memories of sunning as dragons and wherever they were resting as serpents. So yeah, big changes have happened throughout the world, which we are aware of. And also, I thought really interesting the detail that Amber is touching Paragon's wizard wood with her bare hands is mentioned.
Yeah, ever since last chapter.
Yeah. And I don't know that it was ever said that she was wearing her gloves, or I feel like it was such a passing thing.
Yeah, in my head, I specifically made note that she took off her gloves.
Yes.
And switched to bare hands, but I don't know if we mentioned it the last time we talked about them.
Right. But it is really interesting that before last chapter, I think most of the time she's interacting with Paragon while they've been at sea have been with gloved hands.
Yeah.
Because I know she's touched him with bare hands once or twice on the beach whenever he was beached early days. But now there's more of that effort to have a connection. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And we kind of see evidence here in the first few paragraphs that Amber and Paragon's relationship is deepening. They are continuing that trust that they lent each other during that last chapter. We discussed them, and Paragon is more willing to share as he continues into telling Amber, we need to see these islands as Ludluck saw them.
Right.
And he talks about his history, that he was Sedge Ludluck's son, and everyone called him Lucky Ludluck, and Kennit was Lucky's son, and Kennit seized on that name, luck. It was always so important to him. So then Paragon, as we've talked about before, tells the history of him sailing here. We've talked about how Lucto was Sedge's eldest son, and he sailed with his father, Sedge, but the tension between them was constant. Sedge had the imagination of a rock. He bought cheap and sold dear. That was his sole ethic in life, the Ludluck ethic. He paid his men as little as he could, and changed crew often because he was so callous to them. Their lives were always worth less to him than his cargoes. He never stopped to wonder if life could be different. He didn't fear me because he lacked the imagination to know what I could do.
So this is a little bit of the peek into the horribleness that were the Ludluck captains on Paragon's decks. And I wanted to talk about this because I'm not sure which chapter it was that I said this, but I think we do continue to get a peek into how Paragon has gotten to where he is now. This isn't all of it. I know there's more coming in the future, but this, especially learning that, sorry, what was his name? Sedge. Sedge wasn't that great. I mean, he doesn't sound like the worst captain that he's ever had. Obviously, Ygritte's going to be pretty hard to beat.
Something similar to Kyle without the slavery, you know? Something that he's just like maximizing profit, right?
Right. He doesn't really care about people. He doesn't really care about the ship. He just wants to make money. And I think that's pretty interesting to know that he seems to think of Sedge as a Ludluck in that way. That like that's the Ludluck way, is to just worry about the profit and not so much about the people.
Right, right. Lucto, his son, was different, Paragon goes on, saying that he was a dreamer, a young man who savored the pleasures of life, and Bingtown was kind of smothering him a bit. So he really took to life on sea and in Divvytown and the Pirate Isles. He had a gift with the lawless folk. He relaxed among them, and in turn they liked him. He helped the family fortune prosper again. Lucto was the one that talked his father, Sedge, into dealing with the Pirate Isles a bit. So helping the family fortune prosper again, that pleased his father. To reward him, Sedge arranged a good match for the boy with the younger daughter of a very proper trader. Obviously, Lucto does not like that arrangement because he doesn't like Bingtown. So it just so happens that Sedge drops dead in the middle of a trade agreement in the Pirate Isles while they're negotiating. And it is natural causes, but it's kind of lucky for Lucto.
Right.
Because then he just stays in the Pirate Isles.
Right. He doesn't have to go back and honor this deal his father made. Do we ever get to know which family it is that he was supposed to marry into?
No, I don't think so. I think this is the only mention of it.
Okay. I was just wondering because, Lucto would be like Ronica's age, right? If you were like they're,
I think so.
The same generation.
Yeah. Something about there.
Yeah.
Because Kennit is early 40s.
Right.
And I feel like Lucto might be, oh man. Lucto might be a little like 10 years older than Ronica.
Okay, sure.
Would be my guess.
Yeah. Not that I'm saying that Ronica would have been the woman, because I don't think there's
generation.
any. Yeah. Just Ronica would have known of Lucto. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, no, because I was thinking about how Kennet's mom is older. And so that's why I was thinking that she's probably around the age of Ronica.
Yeah.
But Lucto could have been 10 years older than her. He could have been 1 year older. We don't know their ages. It's not that important.
Right. Lucto was 22 the day his father died.
Right.
And he ran off and married this Divvytown woman that he fell in love with.
But hopefully not 10 years older.
Right. And then had Kennit. So assuming pretty soon after that. So Lucto would be about mid-60s, probably. Mid to late 60s. And Ronica, we guessed, was around early 60s, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Could be wrong on that. But
obviously, yeah, this is all guesswork. But
about the same generation and time period. Yeah, they probably would have known one another. Maybe even danced together.
Could have, yeah. Kind of weird. I wonder what Althea's dad thought of them.
Yeah. Interesting.
I don't know. Also, if you think about it, so this is just a side tinfoil hat theory, but we know that Ephraim Vestrit hated that Althea was playing on Paragon. Maybe he was friends with Lucto. And
maybe.
It was more of anger at the ship for losing his friend.
Not Lucto, it would be Sedge.
No,
Well, no, it would be Lucto.
Yeah, Lucto.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So Lucto never came back.
Yeah.
And then the ship, 30, 40 years later, comes back capsized.
Or at least he would have known him as well, as a boy.
I don't know. I wonder if there's like a little bit of connection there, and that's why he didn't like. I mean, obviously, you also wouldn't want your kid playing on an abandoned ship
that's known for being violent and dangerous.
Yes,
yeah. You wouldn't want your kid anywhere near that.
No, I mean, there's that as well. But like, what if there's the added layer of he was friends with Lucto or something? Yeah. Because I see them getting along if they both had dreams of getting away from Bingtown and doing something different. Mm-hmm. So I don't know.
Although we don't know if Ephraim had those kinds of dreams at that point in time.
True.
Because it seems hinted at that changed after the Blood Plague.
That's true. That when his kids died, that was what changed him. Yeah.
But either way, yes, Lucto takes over, and his crew, the crew of the Paragon at the time, was willing to follow him because he was very generous in giving out whiskey, because Lucto liked whiskey as well. He's just a little bit more generous than his father. And he married that Pirate Isles girl and vowed he would live like a king on his own little world. He traded well and lived large. He built up a secret refuge for himself and his men. He trusted to the goodwill of his crew to keep his world safe. But there are always hungry men for whom a share of good fortune is not enough. And one brought Ygritte into Lucky's world. Ygritte already had a reputation as the pirate who would do what other men did not even imagine. He came to Lucky with the fable that they would be partners in trade and piracy. Lucto believed him. But in the midst of celebrating their alliance, Ygritte turned on him. He imprisoned my father to subdue me, and took Kennit hostage to control me. And we all had to obey him for the fear he would hurt the others. He cut out my mother's tongue. Paragon. Amber's voice was gentle but urgent. Not your father's. Kennit's. Not your mother. Kennit's. The ship smiled bitterly into the rain. You draw lines that do not exist. It is what you do not understand, Amber. When you speak to Paragon, you speak to the human memories stored in me. When Kennit and I killed myself, it was our suicide. That is the thing I will never understand. How can one hate oneself so much that one is willing to murder that self? The ship shakes his head and says, that's your mistake. No one wants the self to die. I only wanted to make all the rest of it stop. The only way to achieve that was to put death between the world and myself.
I think that depiction of depression and ultimately suicide is really important to have in a book.
Yeah.
Because I think it really does. Like we talked, I think, just last chapter about how there's the myth of depression and succumbing to suicide being a ultimately selfish thing that you're doing. And I think this little blurb here of like, well, it's not about, you don't want to die. Like nobody wants to die. You want everything else to stop.
Right.
And that's the only way. You're backed into a corner. And I think that's a really important thing to bring forward for people who might not have ever had to deal with depression or suicidal thoughts, to be able to look at it in a new light.
Yeah.
And be like, oh, well, I've never thought of it that way. I think it's really important to open the door to conversations about mental health like that, to really
just little different perspectives.
Yeah. Yeah. Really bring forward perspectives that other people may not have been able to encounter. And I think that's really important. So I really like that Hobb has done that here. And I appreciate that it's done with someone like Beloved, who can't imagine ending life because Beloved's life is so important to the trajectory of the world, and they know that. And so, of course...
But also, Beloved can see the potential in everybody else.
Also
and be like, you can change the world if you make different choices.
Yeah, it's like your choices. Yeah.
Not that it's very likely, but you could.
You could.
You know? So...
But yeah, so I think this conversation, having Beloved be the one who's confused, is good to me because it is such a special circumstance where it doesn't feel patronizing. It doesn't feel like, well, who could ever be sad? Like there's that added layer. Obviously, that added layer is more evident to rereaders and people who recognize this as being the fool.
Right.
And so without that layer, it's a little bit less, I don't know. It's all good. It's a good conversation being had.
Yeah, I really like this conversation as well. Just a couple paragraphs previous about how Amber is drawing lines where they don't exist, because it's kind of what Amber tries to explain to Fitz in the later ones. And it's really fun to see Beloved be the one that's confused and being like, I don't understand these things. And Paragon's like, yeah, you don't understand these things. And you're not looking at it from my point of view. And that's Lord Golden to Fitz in the next trilogy.
Yeah. Picking up some knowledge here. Some things to say to Fitz later.
Right.
But yeah, no, the drawing of the lines is an interesting thing, especially because I don't see Beloved as someone who does that, but I guess Beloved is also human, and so there are things that they're blind to and would not understand. So I don't know. I think that's a nice little touch. And this whole thing, it's so interesting to see what Paragon and even Kennit have gone through, especially after last chapter, seeing the a more objective view, I guess, of what happened with Ygritte. Like, we've heard some of the worst details, but having it stated so matter-of-factly and not into the details of this was really bad, and it was somebody who came in under the guise of friendship and destroyed everything just because they could. And I think that's also a really good look at how Ygritte's rule affected others and what Ygritte was doing during his time.
So Paragon then points out that we're here, look over there, that's the island that we're going to. And Amber's like, there's no place to land, that's Key Island. And he's like, no, that's Keyhole Island. Keyhole Island is basically a horseshoe. So if we go around the other side of the island, there's going to be a small opening and we'll sail into a bay. And in the middle of that bay, there's another smaller island, and that's Key Island. So if we go to the backside of Key Island, there's going to be good anchorage there. So it's very protected. You have to sail around this island, go in, and then sail around the other smaller island.
Yeah, lots of maneuvering around.
But we'll be there. That's the protected fortress. That's the kingdom that Lucto wanted for his family.
Right. And it explains why it's so hard to find, because I think this is the first description that we get that isn't from Kennit's point of view. And Kennit's point of view is very it's a hidden island. Yeah,
he directs them to, which is, it also goes to show how far Kennit had to row out with his bum leg after killing somebody, killing Sa'adar. But I think they just anchored about where Paragon is right now.
Yeah.
And then he had to row the boat to the backside of the island, to the backside of the other island.
Yes. So it was quite the distance.
We switch over to Brashen's point of view, and now we kind of get caught up on what Brashen was feeling during this journey instead of just Paragon and Amber being close, right? So Brashen, the captain, has to think about the other things that are going on. He says that Paragon had been very close-mouthed about what made this island so special, and the cynical part of his soul laughed at him, but he still made his commands to the crew. So he turns his attention to the crew, and we kind of reflect on what has been happening during this journey. The crew is on the ragged edge. They are in a bad place. Food had been ruined, painful injuries, the reduced and monotonous diet, and the strenuous tasks of running the ship with too few men would have been demoralizing enough. but they knew that it was Brashen's intent that they would once more face Kennit in battle, and they had no interest in rushing to their doom. So their seamanship had grown both grudging and sloppy. Were the ship himself not so eager to sail, the task would have been hopeless.
I think this is really interesting because we also have to remember that not only are Althea and Jack gone, which are people that Brashen trusts and could have used to help in leadership in this moment, but also the first mate or the second mate that got promoted.
Both mates, yeah.
Yeah.
Althea was first mate and Half was second mate.
And Half was in the boat with Althea.
Yeah.
And he died. Yes. So he's literally without mates. Mm-hmm. And there's probably not really anybody on this ship that is, number one, able to be a mate, and number two, trustworthy enough for Brashen to trust them.
Yeah, I think people do step up later, and we do. I think Samoy comes to mind, but he's not really in the story at this point.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely a power vacuum, and nobody wants to fill it because nobody wants to sail right now.
Yeah.
They wanted to go home.
Right. So it is a really precarious situation, and it's not, I mean, not that it was all fun and games, but it's not just this easy, okay, we've made a decision, let's go. Because yeah, the main group of Amber, Clef, Brashen, and Paragon made a decision.
Right.
But they're not the only ones on the ship, and the four of them can't sail this ship alone. Mm-hmm. So I find that aspect to also be really interesting.
So Clef comes running up and relays what Paragon just told Amber. It's like, oh, this Paragon says this is where we have to sail. And then Brashen rhetorically asks, then what? Because he, at the beginning of his point of view, said Paragon had been closed-mouthed. Paragon hasn't told him anything, because then Clef is like, oh yeah, there's an old woman, apparently, according to Paragon, and hopefully she's still alive on the island. She's kind of the whole thing, that reason why we're here. And they're just learning this now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we know that, and Amber knows that, but it's kind of crazy Brashen doesn't.
Amber knows that now that Paragon told Clef, but I don't think he ever mentioned it out loud to them.
I mean, he just got done telling Amber that this is where Kennit lived.
Yeah, just now, though. Yeah. I'm saying they just arrived at the island. They've been sailing for a little bit, and they didn't know why they were sailing to this island. Paragon just is like, this is where Kennit's going to bring Althea.
Yeah, I guess.
I just found that kind of wild, because Clef just has to break the news. Oh, yeah, this old woman is Kennit's mother.
I don't know. I guess I thought that he had made mention that Kennit's mom lived there to Amber, but maybe not. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Either way, this is the first time Brashen is hearing about it.
And Clef is letting him know that, according to Paragon, his mom is something that Kennit will trade Althea and perhaps even the ship for.
Yeah, trade anything to get back.
Right. Which is really interesting, because whenever we've read Kennit's point of view, it feels like he doesn't really care about her, right? I mean, we've talked about how there's definitely signs that he does care about her, but won't admit it to himself, or he doesn't recognize that in himself. But
he brings the richest stuff back to the island. He does make sure to go back to the island.
And he
brings
checks on
people to
help take care of her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like he does care about her. But it's interesting from the ship's perspective, he cares about her enough to trade anything for her.
Right. Because you have to remember, Paragon might not be true about this.
Yeah.
Like, he might not be accurate. He might not be accurate. Yeah, that's the right word. Because Paragon holds all of the good memories too from when Kennit was a boy.
True.
So Kennit doesn't have those amazing, nostalgic, great memories of his mother.
The fondness,
He has the shadows of what those memories are, but he doesn't have the feelings that go with them. So, yeah. Kennit might not trade them. It doesn't end up being like that. We don't end up seeing that result, but Kennit might not be accurate.
True.
Or Paragon might not be accurate.
And to be fair, the last time Paragon really was sailing with Kennit before Kennit was last on his ship, Kennit was younger. Kennit was a young man. He was
right,
probably still in that stage of parents being infallible. I guess maybe not infallible because he watched his mom get tortured, but
right.
Just the like pedestal you kind of put your parents on when you're younger that fades over time. I feel like when you get older, you see your parent as a human being, as like not a peer, but closer to a peer, like as a fellow and adult. And I think that change in relationship is something that would have happened in the time Paragon was away from Kennit.
Right.
And even if Kennit was like a normal, healthy human being with healthy relationships, that relationship would have changed. But especially knowing that all the happy memories are gone, all those feelings associated with the happy memories are gone, and his disdain for being seen as somebody with a weakness, I think is really something that Paragon can't estimate about about Kennit.
Yeah.
And that Kennit would rather kill his mom than be seen as weak, I think, or have a weakness. So, yeah.
We'll never find out, I guess, because it's not really a plot point.
Yeah.
We jump time a little bit. They are anchoring now at Key Island, inside Keyhole Island's inlet. And Brashen is trying to be very careful about things, and just in case this is like an ambush or this is very heavily populated or something like that. And he's looking around at the wharf that is on the backside of this island, and he's like, well, all this caution and concern is probably not necessary because it looks like no one has been here for a while.
Yeah, it's overgrown. There is the remnants of an old pier, but it's been destroyed a really long time ago. And the path that would have once gone from it is really tiny. It looks like an animal path. It's really overgrown.
Yeah. And then Brashen, as he's talking to Clef here, says, like, we're going to go up ashore and look around. And Clef is all excited. He's like, oh, we're going?
I get to go?
Yeah. And Brashen's like, yeah, I'm going to leave Amber and a handful of men on board of Paragon, but the rest of them, I'm going to take off. We're going to search for water and food and everything like that. Right. But he doesn't want to tell Clef that he's taking most of the men because he's scared that the men will just take the ship and leave.
Right. But it is a good plan. I mean, it's an island where there's nowhere for them to go, really. So they can't just stay on the island.
Yeah.
And he's giving them a task that's important. They're getting food.
Forage. Yeah,
food and water, which they're in dire need of. So it is a smart way to handle it, to have most of them go hunting. And then a small group with himself to look to see if anybody even is living on this island.
Yeah. So now we have Brashen kind of giving those orders, drawing lots for the men, and that's all situated. So he feigns nonchalance and walks up to Paragon and asks, want to tell me what I should expect? And this is like, man, on this reread, I've gained a lot of respect for Brashen in this chapter, specifically in these beginning parts, because of how much trust it takes to just ask your ship that just tried to kill you, like, oh, what should I expect? Not expecting him to tell you at the beginning of this journey to this random island, where he said, like, oh, I promise it'll work. No, he's just like, okay, I got to put my trust in Paragon, you know?
Yeah, the continued trust.
Maybe it's on a little bit close edge with Amber too, of just like, well, I have to because Paragon could kill us whenever he wants, but still.
It could also be from like the courage is coming from a place of hope that Althea's still out there.
Right.
And he can't get Althea if there's no ship.
Yeah,
so,
true.
So I think that's part of it as well. And his want to succeed, right? He, for himself and Paragon.
Yeah.
I think he is really hurt in this moment with what Paragon has done and how Paragon acted. But I also think he understands that he doesn't know the whole story. And there's a chance he never will, but Paragon seems to be okay now. And you just have to keep going forward.
Because we have to remember that Brashen likens his own story to that of Paragon's, right?
Yes.
He wants this still to be a redemption arc for both of them.
Yeah.
He wants to sail back to Bingtown, both of them looking beautiful and accomplished all of their goals. So they are, considered redeemed in the eyes of everybody.
Yeah, I think, and that's a hard thing to do in Bingtown society, right? Because it seems as though once you're branded an outcast, you kind of just are an outcast. You don't really get much opportunity to fix your reputation once it's gone down.
Especially by your family. Like, if you're branded an outcast like Devad Restart, you can still find people to do business with and like family friends and stuff. But if it was Devad's own family, it was just like, no, this guy's kind of weird. No one's going to deal with him. Same with Brashen here.
Exactly.
His father cast him out. It's like, no, you're no longer part of the family. None of the other families are going to touch him because they want deals with that old traitor family still.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's really interesting to think about those dynamics as well in this. But I think you're right. I think that it takes a lot of maturity and grown-upness to be able to face what Brashen has faced and then continue to just say, well, I'm going to trust Paragon. I have to trust him, and then do it. And also still keep the safety of your crew in mind and be planning and making sure that the behind the scenes stuff is going smoothly. Like, he is a good captain. He is built for this.
So Brashen asks Paragon what to expect, and Paragon explains from Kennit's memories of the route that you'll go uphill and then downhill, and then there's an orchard and then the compound. So Lucto took good care of his crewmen. Their wives and children lived here in happier times until Ygritte slaughtered most of them. The rest he carried off as slaves. Paragon paused. He stared blindly at the island. Brashen waited. The last time I sailed here, Mother was still alive. Lucto had perished. Ygritte had taken his games too far and Father died. When we departed, Mother was marooned alone. That amused Ygritte, I think. But Kennit swore he would come back to her. I believe he would have kept that oath. She was a doughty woman. Even as battered as she was, she would have chosen to live. She may still be alive here. If you find her, when you find her, tell her your tale. Be honest with her. She deserves that much. Tell her why you have come to take her. The ship's boyish voice choked suddenly. Don't terrorize or hurt her. She has had enough of that in her life. Ask her to come with us. I think she may come willingly. Brashen took a deep breath and confronted the villainous aspect of the ship's plan. It shamed him. I'll do the best I can, he promised Paragon. The best he could. Could the word best be applied at all to this task, the kidnapping and bartering of an elderly woman? He did not think so, yet he would do it to regain Althea safely. He tried to console himself. He would see that she came to no harm. Surely Kennit's own mother had nothing to fear from the pirate. He voiced the largest hole in the plan. And if Kennit's mother is no longer here, then we wait, Paragon says. He's going to come here sooner or later.
Ooh. Yeah, so this little aside, I think it shows growth in Paragon that he is telling this to Brashen.
Right. Yeah, he's opening up.
He's opening up about what happened, and that is a little bit of Kennit's secret, right? But it's also Paragon's story. And I think that's an aspect we haven't really touched on, that Paragon has been talking about how he feels so guilty and that this is all Kennit's life. It's his secrets. He can't let that go. But it's not just about Kennit. Kennit wasn't the only one who went through everything. Obviously, he kind of went through a lot more, but like Paragon also was tormented by Ygritte in other ways. He was tortured. He was also a victim, and he also had memories of all these things that had happened. And so it's not just Kennit's story, it's Paragon's. And I think it's really sad that Paragon has had to feel like his story is Kennit's secret, so he can't talk about himself. And I think it's nice that he gets to finally feel comfortable enough opening up to people he cares about.
With the decision to be three to become one, like the three aspects of him becoming one, that gives him an actual person. Like, that gives him a personhood, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say personality because he had multiple of those before, but that gives him an identity.
Right. A sense of self.
Yes, exactly. And this chapter, we really see that opening up because previously when those cracks were forming and when he was complaining and whining to Amber last chapter, we discussed it. He was complaining about those cracks being open. He's like, this is bad.
Right.
I'm not supposed to do this. But now that he's kind of settled into it and the trust between the two of them has been communicated, Paragon can accept that it's okay for those secrets and that story to come out. And he's kind of settling into his own and becoming more stable. Yes, it shows. And Robin Hobb says that these different voices are still coming out of him, the
Right.
boyish and the man's voice and things like that. But it's not an unsteady change. It's just a change based on what story he's telling.
Yeah, like what memories he's pulling from. I think that is really interesting too, because I like the idea that these different personalities of Paragons were not something that need to be cured. They just needed to be accepted.
Yeah.
And I like that those aspects are still there. They just are more under control, I guess. And it's more natural. It's less of a weird, disjointed, like, oh, now it's a different personality. What's going on? And even Paragon himself didn't feel like he knew what was going on.
I'll do some ship metaphors for that. It's less of like a summer squall rolling in. He's more even keeled now.
Okay. Some ship humor for you.
So yeah, they kind of get some information, and Brashen now leads the force of armed men onto the island.
Right. And I think it's really interesting that Paragon is so worried about Kennit's mom.
Yeah, he hasn't seen her for 30 years.
No, and he does still have that respect for her and love. And it's very evident that that's happening. But I also think it's good to hear from Brashen's point of view this like war of, I cannot believe I'm about to go kidnap an old lady.
Right,
like this is horrible. I can't believe I have to promise the ship I'm going to be nice to her. Like, I don't want to be mean, but what if I have to? And it's really interesting to me because this does feel very similar to the conversation that Kennit had with Wintrow right before Althea and Brashen arrived.
Right, yeah.
So there is that parallel there of a young boy asking the captain, like, please don't hurt my family. Please just hear them out. Please just be truthful with them. And then that captain saying, I'll do my best. I can't promise not to, but I will do my best. But the juxtaposition of Brashen actually thinking like
that earnestness,
of I don't want to hurt this person.
Right.
That would feel awful. But also, I will take her by force if I have to because Althea's life is on the line. But I don't want to hurt her. Whereas Kennit was more thinking, how do I best phrase this so that when I hurt them, it's not my fault?
Yeah, exactly.
And I didn't break a promise. So I think that's a really interesting parallel there that I noticed that I wanted to point out because
that's a really cool parallel. Yeah.
Yeah. There it is. Both dealing with Kennit in a way.
So Brashen is leading the men on the island and they're walking through the island. They're all armed, and he states that it's probably more of a precaution against the wild pigs than men because it seems so abandoned. And maybe if she is still alive, she might be mad if she's been living alone for all of these years. They crest the hill and start down the hill, and at the bottom, they emerge into an orchard like Paragon says. And he realizes that, halfway through this orchard, some of these trees look cared after. Some of them are pruned. The grass had been trampled down, and Brashen caught a faint whiff of wood smoke on the air. He saw now what the tangled trees had hidden. A whitewashed great house dominated the valley, flanked by a row of cottages along the edges of the cultivated lands. He halted, and his men stopped with him, muttering in surprise. A barn suggested livestock. He lifted his eyes to isolated sheep and goats grazing on the opposite hillside. This was too much to be the work of one set of hands. There were people here. There would be confrontation. So he glances back at the men following him, saying, "Follow my lead. I want to talk my way through this." The ship said that she might be willing to go with us. Let's hope that's so. Basically setting them up. We don't want to fight.
Like, please don't start a fight unless it's necessary, which he notes isn't really taken well. Everybody's kind of grumbling because they all know how well that worked last time. He told them not to fight.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that goes. I do also want to talk about how Paragon did tell Brashen that Lucto put his home far back because he didn't want anybody to happen upon it.
Mm-hmm.
Like he wanted it to be hidden away.
Right.
So it's really interesting that until they crest the hill where they will be able to see everything, Brashen is thinking, oh my God, nobody's here. She's going to have gone mad. And they crest the hill and he's like, oh, this is actually like...
It's actually not even until they crest the hill. They have to go down the hill and look through the tree branches because the trees are so thick. Like, it's very well hidden.
Yeah. Well, probably helped by the fact that,
it's an island in the middle of nowhere.
And yes. And there really are not that many people. Yeah. Or like the people who are helping have only just gotten there.
Right.
But yeah, no, I think that's so interesting that Brashen doesn't even think about the fact that there might be something there to look for because he's like, he trusts Paragon, but not enough to really fully take him at his words. And to be fair,
I think it's because it looks nice. It looks well kept as well.
Yeah.
It's not just overgrown and abandoned and like there's only one place that looks semi-lived in, like a campsite or something. It's actual rows of houses that are cleared out.
Yeah, which would be surprising. It is a little bit of a shock.
So he sees a woman carrying a child flee towards one of the buildings, slamming the door behind her. That's Selah and her child. An instant later, it opens again, and I believe Dej is his name. A large man steps out, spots them, and then ducks back inside and grabs a woodsman's axe. So one of the archers lifts up their bow, and Brashen is like, down. We're being peaceful here.
And he lifts his arms up as well to show peaceful intent.
Yes. So he reaches a hard decision. The people that he sees aren't advancing. They don't look impressed, and he has a group of men behind him. So he says, keep your bows lowered, follow me, but 20 paces behind. Unless I order it, no man shoots an arrow. And this is where everyone's like, oh, yeah, sure.
I remember the last peaceful negotiation.
Yeah.
But also, Selah has come back out of the cottage and she's now holding a cudgel. The baby is nowhere to be seen.
Yes. So he yells out that I'm coming down. I just want to talk, and starts walking. And she's like, stay where you are. We'll talk where you are right now. He keeps coming, and the man steps up, axe ready to meet him. There had to be another way, he thinks. The Ludluck woman, he shouts. He wishes Paragon had told him the mother's name. Lucky's widow. I want to talk to her. That's why we've come. The man halts and looks back at the woman, says, we're the only ones here. Go away and forget you ever came. So she knew the odds were against them. If his men fanned out, they could trap them in the cottage. He decided to push his advantage. I'm coming down. I just want to see that you're telling the truth. If she isn't here, we'll go away. We want no bloodshed. I just want to speak to the Ludluck woman. The man is still uncertain. He glances back at Selah here, and Brashen slowly is walking towards the house.
Right. He's keeping his arms clear of his sword. He does not want any impression that this is going to be a battle, that he's trying to trick them.
Mm-hmm. And the closer that he's coming to the town, the more he doubted that they were the only people on the island, because he sees at least one more cottage that has a well-trod path to the door and is kind of well taken care of. A slight movement of the woman's head warned him. He turned just as a slender young woman launched herself from the tree. She was barefoot and unarmed, but her fury was her weapon. Raiders! Raiders! Filthy raiders! She yelled as she attacked with her fists and nails. He lifted his arm to shield his face from her nails. Ankle, no, stop, run away, the other woman screamed. We're not slavers, Brashen told her, but Ankle only came at him more fiercely. He manages to catch her wrists and tries to just restrain her, but it was like hugging an angry cat. Her bare feet thudded against his shins while she bit his shoulder. His vest was thick, but it did not dull the savagery of her attack. Stop it, he shouted at her. We're not slavers. I just need to talk to Kennit Ludluck's mother. That is all. At the name Kennit, the girl in his arms went limp. He took advantage of the moment to heave her toward the woman with the knife. The woman caught her with one arm and then put her behind her. She held up a hand to halt Axeman's headlong charge. Kennit, she demanded. Kennit sent you here. It didn't seem a good time to correct her. I have a message for his mother.
Yeah.
He's taking any advantage he can. It's a bad situation, and he's trying to still diffuse it.
Right. And I find it kind of interesting that Selah and her husband, Dej, are willing to continue to fight him right now, considering Ankle was fighting him and he did not fight back. He just tried to keep her off of him, and the first chance he got pushed her towards them to her safety. I feel like that should have done.
Well, it did stop them, right? She did like ask the question, and she's just kind of protecting Ankle now, and they're not advancing. She stopped Dej's advance with the axe. So there's a little bit of a slowdown.
Right. I just feel like that should have done more to assure them that Brashen wasn't going to harm them. I get it. He came out of nowhere. He has a bunch of guys behind him with weapons.
They were slaves.
They were slaves. For sure. That's probably what it is. But in my mind, I'm like, but he is a good guy. So why aren't they? They trusted Kennit. Like,
it was Kennit freed them from slavery.
True. But yeah, so never mind. It does make sense. I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. It's just in my mind, I wish that they would have accepted Brashen earlier.
So Ankle is saying, liar, liar, kill him, Selah, kill him. And for the first time, Brashen realized that all was not right with her mind. The man with the axe is trying to comfort her a bit, and she stilled, but continued to pull faces at him. There was no exchange of glances. The woman was obviously thinking, and he now knew who was in charge here. So eventually Selah's like, okay, come on. Ankle, you run to fetch Mother. Don't alarm her. Just say a man is here with a message from Kennit. Go on. And Dej is going to stand here and watch your men. If one of them moves, we'll kill you. Understand? And Brashen's like, yeah, of course. This is all we wanted to do. You know, I will go alone into the town here. Stay here, do nothing. I'll be back. None of them looked happy about it, but they nodded agreement, the men from Paragon. So he's walking through town now, and there's tilled earth, chickens, sheep, goats, pigs. This island could support a substantial settlement. He's looking around, and it's like, well, this is a pretty nice place.
Way nicer than he expected.
Yeah.
And I think really interesting because some of that couldn't just have been Selah, Dej, and Ankle's doing, right? Like, this is probably something that Kennit's mom has been taking care of alone for all this time.
Yeah. I mean, at least a little bit. We know that it looks better now based on descriptions than it did when Kennit was there last time, because more cottages have been cleaned up. I'm sure more of the orchard and more of the livestock are kind of corralled. But yeah, his mom had to live there, and Kennit probably helped when he went back and visited a little bit just to make sure she was comfortable.
And, you know, bring back livestock, because I'm sure Ygritte did not leave livestock on that. Although they could have escaped. Like, there's
wild
a chance.
Pigs and stuff, definitely.
Also that, yeah. I don't know.
But yeah, he probably I would most definitely brought livestock. Like goats or something, you know?
I wonder if he had to kill the people that he had help him bring them to the island every time.
I don't know. Maybe he just rode himself.
Could be, yeah. I don't know.
So they go into a cottage, and at the door, she gets in front of him, Selah does, and inside scoops up the baby. Sit down, she ordered him. He sat, looked around the room. The furnishings spoke of folk with more time than skill, so obviously they've had handmade furniture, and it's cozy, you know, despite the not high quality of everything.
There's no artistry to it.
Right. It's well made, and it serves, and it's lived in. The baby quieted in the mother's arm. The woman began the universal rocking sway of women holding children. You have a nice home, he said inanely. Her eyes widened in confusion. It's good enough, she said grudgingly. And better than many another place we've both been, I'm sure. That's true, she conceded. He put on his best Bingtown manners, small talk while they waited for the lady of the house. He tried to sit as if he had confidence in her hospitality. It's a good place to raise a boy. Plenty of room to run free, lots to explore. Healthy as he looks, it won't be long before he's ranging the whole island. Probably, she conceded, looking down for an instant at the baby's face. He's what, about a year old? Brashen hazarded a wild guess. It brought a smile to her face. Scarcely, but I think he is big for his age. So he disarms her.
Yeah. And to be fair, it's so interesting. Again, I feel like I have to draw back this sort of parallel to Brashen and to Kennit because it is so different, right? Brashen is genuinely a nice person, I think. And these are things that he actually is talking about because he probably is curious on a natural level, but he also knows that it'll help to disarm. Like, this is a mother. I'm going to talk about her child, but in a normal way and being like, oh, he's so cute. How old is he? Like, show me pictures. Like that's going to help show see, I'm a normal person. I'm not here to do anything. And it does help a little bit, I think. But also love that Brashen's like, I'm taking a wild guess, a year old? And she's like, well, he's a little big. He's not quite. And Brashen's over there like, I don't know what babies look like. That could be anything.
It was a good guess, though.
It was.
So a sound outside the door brings her back to alertness. And Brashen is hoping that he disarmed some of her distrust. Ankle thrusts her head into the room, glares at him, points and says, Raider, liar. And Sayla's like, go outside, Ankle. There's an odd muttering from outside the door, and an older woman enters. Kennit had his mother's eyes. She tipped her head inquiringly at him. She carried a basket on one arm. Wide-capped brown mushrooms glistened inside it. So again, she kind of gabbles at Sayla, makes a questioning noise, and she replies. He showed up, coming from the cove with 6 men. He says he has a message for you from Kennit, but he asked for you as Lucky's widow, the Ludluck woman. The older woman turned an incredulous gaze on Brashen. She raised her brows in an exaggerated gesture of surprise and muttered something. So this is something that it probably really, really surprised her because they probably didn't go by Ludluck.
Yeah.
Because why would they? It was probably known, right? Yeah. But he probably just went by Captain Lucky. And she probably went by her first name because she was from the Pirate Isles. She is not a Bingtown woman.
Right.
So that name doesn't really have much meaning. So she would know it, obviously.
Right.
And his crew probably would know it. But it's not like a thing that they were going to bandy around, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, it is Kennit Ludluck. Like, he probably was raised at least knowing enough about why he has
his father definitely talked about it to their family, right? And to Kennit, and instilled we are the Ludluck family. We are, owners of this Liveship, taught him all the family history, probably things like that. But it doesn't mean that much to people outside of that immediate family. So for someone after 30 years, 35 years maybe, coming in and being like, hey, this last name that you probably didn't care much about, except it was your husband's last name. I'm asking you by that name.
And asking for your husband, who has been dead for 30 years.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a surprise there for Mother. And she's like, what's happening? And Brashen's like, this is going to be hard if she has no tongue.
Yeah. I bet she's probably thinking where are you from?
Right.
Why do you know that name?
And so he immediately starts and says, Paragon brought me here. He should have been prepared for her shock. Kennit's mother staggered where she stood and then gripped the edge of the table. Sayla uttered an exclamation and stepped forward to steady the old woman. We need your help. Paragon wants you to come with us to see Kennit. You can't take her off the island, not alone, Sayla cried angrily. She can bring whoever she wants to bring, Brashen said recklessly. We mean no harm to her. I keep telling you that. I am here to take her to Kennit. Kennit's mother lifted her face and stared at Brashen. Her mild blue eyes pierced him with their acuity. She knew that no one who mentioned Paragon came from Kennit. She knew that whether or not he intended harm to her, he would be taking her into danger. Her eyes were the ancient eyes of a martyr, but they met his steadily in a long look. She nodded. She says she will go with you, Selah needlessly informed him.
So I think this is a really cool thing that Robin Hobb has done here, where Brashen is looking into the eyes of this woman who has survived so much and has really had to survive on her own for so long. And she knows what's going on. She's not this not crazy. Exactly, but no, but she's not a doddering old lady who's gone mad. Mm-hmm. This is a woman who knows what's going on, who is strong and who bravely looks in the face of this danger and agrees to go. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really big. And I think
because it's her son.
It is her son,
and her family Liveship.
Yeah, but I also think a big aspect of this is that throughout it all, it's her eyes that convey this.
Yeah.
And I think that's important because this whole time we've had Kennit talk about how his eyes are so weak. They make him look weak and they're awful and he hates them and he wishes he didn't have his mother's eyes. But
her mild blue eyes.
Yeah. But her mild blue eyes are what show her to be a strong woman in Brashen's point of view.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think that's such an interesting choice to have it be the focus on the eyes of a martyr. I just found that so cool because I think it's such a cool
literary device.
Of like
showing the contrast between them once again.
Yes, the contrast between them, but also just how unreliable of a narrator Kennit is again, but also just like how much he underestimates the people around him.
Yeah.
Like in his mind, his mom is a victim and that's all she'll ever be.
Right.
And his mom is a victim, but she's also a survivor and she's also a strong person who has had to live through horrible things.
And that's what Paragon thought about her too.
Exactly. And so I just really like that. I don't know. I just thought it was a really cool little detail to put in there. And I don't know if it was done on purpose or not, but I like to believe it was. And I think it's really nice.
Yeah. Because Paragon says that she would have chosen to live. I don't know if she's alive. It's been 30 years since I've seen her, but she would have chosen to live. And she did.
Yeah.
Because she's a strong woman and without hesitation is like, yep, I'm going to go with you and I want to bring him. And Selah's like, him?
You can't go with him.
Yeah. And Brashen's like, well, I said whoever, so doesn't matter.
And then so we as rereaders know the him in question is Kyle.
Yes.
And Brashen does not know that.
Right.
But here.
And maybe the readers forget that while reading, right? Yeah. That's kind of like the narrative device. You distract them with all the other things and like the emotional impact of Paragon coming out of his shell and maybe meeting Mother soon and talking about that you almost forget that Kyle is a character because he got put away in the beginning of like the second book or something.
Yeah. Well, and to be honest, not a whole lot of people are talking about getting him back.
Right.
I mean, Kefria does, but other than that,
and
nobody's
Malta mentioned him like twice, I think, in this book.
But she always mentions him as her father. I don't really think she talks about him much as Kyle Haven. And so I think there is that enough distance. And when I was reading this, I was like, who's him again? Is there another guy on the island? Because I was like, isn't Sedge there? Like, isn't he? Is
Dedge.
that Dedge? Sorry, isn't Dedge here? Is that who they're talking about?
Yeah, what's that about? Like Sedge and Dedge? Come on, Robin. Anyways,
but yeah, so I was like, oh, okay, like maybe it's Dedge that they're talking about. But then when Selah turns around and says, "Are you sure the message was she could bring anyone?"
Yeah, whoever she wants.
And Brashen's like, yeah.
Paragon said to trust you.
He has no idea. He's just narrowly gotten Kyle's freedom.
Right.
So that's a little bit crazy.
But Brashen's saying that Paragon said to trust you, meeting her eyes again. Kennit's mother closed her eyes for an instant. When she opened them, they swam with tears. So that message right there really goes to show how much it means to her, even though she wasn't part of Bingtown or an old trader family until she married into one, right?
Yeah.
She understood the depth of that bond.
Yeah.
She understands that they are family and that with Paragon saying to trust her, that goes to show that he isn't like as crazy or mad or anything, because he was probably still
the mad ship.
Yeah, the mad ship back then.
Well, he didn't, but he had killed 2 crews at that point.
Yeah.
That was his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I also was thinking about how Brashen saying, I trust Paragon, and Paragon says to trust you. I think that's really big because she probably was worried about Paragon.
Yeah.
Like, what's his life been like? What's he been up to?
Mm-hmm.
She had Kennit on Paragon's deck.
Right.
And let her husband offer that baby to the ship. Like,
right.
So there is a connection there. Like, her blood is probably on the deck. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy to think about. And so it's really interesting to see that
she got a member of her family back after 30 years.
Yeah.
After a massacre took them all away, She's
finally seeing him again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really big.
So Mother says through Selah that she has a few things to gather. We'll meet you. And Brashen's like, yep, we'll wait for you. We'll be at the ship. And before he walks out the door, Selah stops him like, hey, hold on. And then sticks her head out the door and says, Ankle, put that down. Mother says we're to let him back to the cove. If you hit him with that, I'll take a belt to you. Now I mean it. And outside the door, a heavy stick of kindling was flung disdainfully to the earth. So he watches the girl run away and notes that if he had stepped out of the door, she would have brained him. He felt a cold rush up his spine at the thought. He would have died.
He absolutely would have died. Yeah. And they wouldn't have let him go, or they would have let him just pass through that door and get killed if he wouldn't have convinced them that he is trustworthy.
Yeah. So Selah speaks up for Ankle. Like she hasn't been right since they chained her, but she's getting better. She can't help it. And Brashen's like, I don't blame her, and found that he did not. She could not have been more than 16. She had a very pronounced limp as she hurried up to Dej. He listened, then acknowledged the message with a nod to Selah. So they walk back to the ship and wait. It ends that point of view with Brashen wondering what Dej would say or do when he was told Kennit's mother planned to take him with her. Yeah. So that's another thing of like, oh, Dej is the he that's going to come along.
Right. But he is not, I don't think.
No, he's not. It's Kyle, obviously.
Yeah. Well, but I was wondering if he also comes along to go with them, but I don't,
No, he doesn't. No, it's only Kyle and Mother.
Right, but he does help them board.
Mm-hmm. So they are back at Paragon and they were waiting, and Amber's like, how long do we wait then? Brashen's shrugging. He had returned immediately to the ship and found his men jubilantly gutting 2 hairy pigs they had taken with spears. They wanted to hunt longer, but he had insisted that everyone go back aboard. He didn't want to take any chances for trickery. Paragon remained silent through his account. Amber had looked thoughtful, and Paragon finally speaks up, saying, never fear, she will come. She loves Kennit as much as I did. Which is a crazy thing to say for Paragon.
Yeah.
She loves Kennit as much as I did. It's past tense. It doesn't mean it's not present tense as well.
Right.
But it's a weird way to phrase it.
I feel like it's a move towards distancing that relationship of his hurt. It shows that
I think it's the the difference between loving without reservations and like what we were talking about in the previous chapter about Paragon and Kennit and why he was so hurt about like Amber.
Right.
It's like, oh, love is when you forgive them for anything that they could have possibly done ever, and you just go back to loving him because that's love, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's the kind of love he's talking about, of like his mother loves him as I did back then, where I would just nothing matters.
Right.
And now I think, as we're talking about, he's regaining some sense of self here. He realizes that, there are some things wrong with that one-sided relationship.
Yeah.
I still love him a lot. He's still family, but, it's not as unreservedly as before.
Right.
So as if the words had summoned her, Brashen sees them approach. She looks up at Paragon and her hands flew to her tongueless mouth. She stared at him. Dej comes up behind her and he's carrying a sack over his shoulder, and in his free hand he held the end of a chain. At the end of it shambled a wreck of a man, long-haired and pale, thin as a bundle of sticks. The chained man turned his eyes from the light, wincing as if it pained him. "What is that?" Amber demanded in horror. "I guess we'll find out soon enough." And then Selah is pushing a barrow of potatoes and turnips. Few trussed roosters squawked loudly atop the vegetables, and Amber immediately grasped what they're on about, and Brashen's like, "Yep, you can barter with them." And Amber's like, "Okay, do we offer a lot or try to be very sparing with our bartering?" And Brashen's like, "I trust you." Just kind of
use your judgment. I doubt we have much, but anything they can't make for themselves will probably please them.
Yeah, exactly. And so we find out later in Brashen's point of view here that Amber is like bartering away some of the dead sailors' clothes and things like they had made and things like that, and they get a lot of stuff that they need, a lot of food.
Right. And Brashen feels a little bit weird about giving the dead people's clothes away.
Right.
Because that feels wrong, but nobody else on the crew seems to mind. And ultimately it is just clothes.
Yeah.
And
it's their survival and comfort.
Exactly. So you might as well give it to people who will actually use it.
Right.
So the trade actually goes a really long way to softening up Selah to the group. And I think especially having Amber there as well.
Yeah.
And clearly Amber, a woman who has some sway on the ship, is in charge of the bartering. I think that really helps Selah.
Yeah.
Because she's also a woman in charge.
You let more ease.
Yeah. That like, okay, so there's first of all a woman aboard, which is good news for our mother dearest, but also a woman who knows what's what is giving us stuff.
Yeah. And generosity with the trades too.
Exactly.
Helps. So Mother comes aboard and immediately goes to the foredeck, and she's carrying a canvas packet with her. It was more difficult to get the chained man aboard. He could not manage to climb the ladder, so he had to be hoisted over like cargo. Once on deck, he just huddles in a heap, moaning softly. He's sheltering his head with his scarred hands and arms. Brashen guessed it had taken all his strength to get that far. So Selah, at the end of everything, says, "You'll take good care of Mother," and he promises great and excellent care. Selah and Dej watched from the shore as they departed, and Brashen stood on the foredeck by Kennit's mother as the anchor was lifted. He wondered to himself how Kennit would treat those on the island when he discovered how easily they had surrendered his mother. Then he glanced at the old woman. She seemed calm and clear of conscience. Perhaps he could be as well. He turned to Amber, saying, "Shift Althea's things. We'll put into my room. We'll put Mother in the first mate's chamber, try to make it as comfortable as possible. And cut the chains off that poor devil and feed him. Saw only knows why she dragged him along, but I'm sure she had a reason." "I'm sure she did," Amber replied in such a strange tone that Brashen was glad when she hurried off to her tasks.
Just a quick pause. Is it a weird tone because Amber knows that is Kyle now?
I think so.
Or, okay.
I think it's like, oh, everything's coming together.
Like kind of the paths are emerging.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of a look into, some sort of trance, like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Whenever Amber or Beloved or Fool or whatever name they're going by says something in a weird tone, like everybody notices that it's a weird tone, I immediately am like, oh my gosh, it's a trance and something's happening that's supposed to happen in the timeline. So I don't know. That's just like a bias I have now.
So Kennit's mother keeps her place on the foredeck and stays by the figurehead, and she's nodding approval at the crew, and she seems familiar with the ways of people aboard a ship. As Paragon began to move, she lifted her head and her veined hands ran along the forerail in the little pats of a proud mother on her son's shoulders. As the wind took Paragon, he began to slice the waves his way out of the cove. The old woman unwrapped her package. Brashen rejoins her. 3 fat, worn books emerged from the yellowed canvas. Brashen knit his brow. "Ship's logs," he exclaimed. "The logs of the Paragon, a live ship trader vessel of the Bingtown on the cursed shores. Paragon, they're your logs." "I know," the ship replied gravely. "I know." A hoarse voice creaked from behind him. "Trell. Brashen Trell." Brashen turned in consternation. Amber is supporting the skeletal prisoner and says he insisted he had to speak to you. The prisoner spoke over her words. His blue eyes watered as he fixed Brashen with a doleful stare. His head nodded restlessly in an aimless circle, his hands palsied as well. I'm Kyle Haven, and I want to go home. I just want to go home.
I'm so sad that the chapter ends there, and then the next chapter is in a different area. We don't get to know Brashen's reaction. We don't get to know.
And of course, Robin Hobb's going to skip that reaction and go to like days later or something.
And he'll think back on what he thought, but it's not the instant reaction of Kyle.
That's the one thing that sometimes I wish happened, is like the instant realization and not it has to be a chapter cliffhanger, you know?
Yeah, and then come back to the memory of what happened 4 days ago.
Right. But yeah, so Paragon gets his logs at the end here, which we will see him kind of, again, restore more of that identity and that memory, whether that's through Mother kind of relaying her own memories, reattaching that bond to Paragon and relaying her own memories and life experiences back to Paragon so he remembers, or if it's the presence of the logs. We'll try to discuss it then, but I know we asked that question a long time ago and never really came to a solid answer, just kind of theories. So we'll try to divulge those. Definitely wrong words for this. We will dive into that a bit in the upcoming chapters when I think a couple paragraphs might discuss it.
Right. I do want to talk about, I think it is really telling that he knows what the books are. Right. Although we don't know how close he is with Mother, and she is touching him with bare hands on his wizard wood. So
like you said, she gave birth on deck.
Yeah. So they could have that little bit of blood connection, and
they almost certainly do. I would guess.
And I wonder if she is like telling him what she has, and that's why he knows before Brashen says anything.
Right.
Like maybe she's communicating with him when we can't hear. But also, I think it's really interesting to think about, is his tone so sad because of what the books contain, like their content?
Right.
Or is his tone sad just because he feels bad for Mother and she's said something that makes him feel sad? You know what I mean?
And it's not even necessarily sad. We don't even know that. It's just gravely. The ship replied gravely, which is just seriously. So the readers are inferring whatever they want to it, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to tell.
I guess.
So it's very...
in my mind, whenever somebody is gravely talking about something, it's usually like a sad thing that you're talking about seriously in my mind.
Yeah.
But I guess that's not always the case. It just usually is very serious.
Yeah, it's very serious.
At the very least. And I feel like,
there's import to it at least.
Yeah.
And then Kyle. The reader gets the revelation that this is indeed Kyle spoken out loud.
Not looking good.
No, he has been mistreated for the good part of a year here, and I pity him a lot.
Yeah,
he is malnourished. He is on the edge of dead just from the exertion of walking to the ship.
Just a quick recap question. So whenever Kyle was on board his ship, everything goes on. He got beat up pretty bad during the whole takeover of his ship. But was he beat up again after that? Like, did he...
I think he was kept in his room, so no. But he had, like, broken ribs, I think, from the first initial beating. So it was taking a long time to heal. And he stayed in his room when Wintrow was going to feed him.
Right.
And never wanted to go out on deck after that. And then Kennit drops him off at the island.
Right.
So I think he had healed by then when he got to the island, but he was chained up underground in the dark the whole time.
Right.
So those are the scars on his arms.
And to be fair, there's no telling if he actually was beat up a few more times underground, because with the ex-slaves who were on his ship coming to feed him, if he said anything snarky, which he absolutely would have because that's who he is, like, there's no telling if they kept their tempers in check or were able to, which, not blaming them either. That was a really tough situation for everybody involved. But, like...
And Kennet's orders were, like, feed him when you remember, basically. It was, like, every couple days, you know?
Yeah, if you want to. Keep him alive, but, like, just... So,
and that's what they did. He's just alive.
yeah.
His hands are palsied. Like, he's mid to late 30s.
Yeah. Well, and the like rolling of his head too. That's why I'm wondering if he had a really if he's been beat more, because that feels like something that would happen from like head injuries, but maybe not.
Yeah. I haven't really looked into or understand the effects of starving somebody, or people who are in like prisoner of war camps or the concentration camps during the Holocaust or anything. But that's what comes to mind when he's described.
Right.
Is that kind of undernourished and skin and bones kind of description.
Right. No, definitely. And obviously I'm not a doctor. I don't know how it works, but just like thoughts that I was thinking during this is like, is that all from starvation, or was there like
it could be
additional beatings doled out?
It definitely could be more. My thought didn't go to the beatings. It was just the malnourishment and like muscle atrophy and things like that. But
and not being in sunlight, like vitamin D deficiency at the very least.
Yeah. So rough shape. Kyle just wants to go home, and it's a very pitiful thing that is introduced back onto Paragon's decks here, and Robin Hobb does it so well. Like, if you talk to somebody about the Liveship traders who has read it, they're like, Kyle is the worst human being in the world, right?
Right.
That's kind of like their initial thought. Because, again, like we've talked about, comparing Umbridge and Voldemort. Yeah, obviously Voldemort's worse, but everyone's like, I hate Umbridge.
Yes.
Because you've met an Umbridge. You've met a Kyle.
Yes.
Or multiple Kyles in your life. Kennit and Voldemort aren't necessarily common.
No.
Yes, they're worse, but they're not necessarily common, so you can relate more to these other people. And we have Kyle getting his comeuppance, and he is put away and locked away and forgotten about.
Even by readers, kind of.
Yeah. He's forgotten about literally by readers, and on purpose, I think, by Robin Hobb, just trying to ignore him. And he's forgotten by the characters as well. Wintrow kind of moves past thinking about him and feeling guilt for him, right?
Yeah.
Malta just thinks about like,
what would my father think in this situation?
Exactly. My father wouldn't accept me back because I look hideous.
Right.
I want to save people, but it's only kind of come around when she knows she's going to be discussing with Kennit, and Kennit's the one who took over her father's ship, right?
Right.
And then Keffria is like, do I want to forget about Kyle and move on? And she has those conversations. So in the story, he's being forgotten about by the characters, but also he's not brought up enough where the readers remember him much.
Yeah.
And then he's reintroduced as a very pitiful character, somebody to pity. And yes, those feelings come back of like, but he's awful, but you still feel bad for him.
Yeah.
I think it's really well done.
Well, I think too, because we don't see anything that happens to to Kyle after Kennit leaves him on the island.
Right.
It is really easy to keep that anger for him whenever he's mentioned, to think about evil Kyle. And like, yeah, we know he got locked up and that's not great, but you're not thinking about the result of that.
You're thinking of his containment with Wintrow going to him, still railing against everything. Like, it's everyone else's fault. It's your fault, Wintrow, still being mean. And then,
not taking any accountability. So you're primed to be like, he's fine. He's full of life. He's a jerk. I don't care about him. And then to see how bad it's gotten.
Yeah.
That is the like, oh, whoa.
Now, granted, I don't exactly remember how he acts in the upcoming chapters about him. I think he still is a little like, he's not like a pleasant man, and a year in captivity isn't going to rehabilitate you.
No, that's not going to teach you the lesson of like kindness and joy.
But he's still pitiful. You know, he's very easily pitied at this point. And it's not just a black and white, this person is awful.
Exactly.
Which we discussed before. It wasn't black and white beforehand.
No.
You know?
Right. Because he does think he is a good person. He is just trying to help his family in his mind.
Yes. Help it. Like, so we'll go over this quickly again, I think, because we've discussed it in depth. But our thoughts were he is a family man in his mind, right? He wants to help his family. And yes, he has a deep-seated ambition to become a captain of a live ship because that is a great thing to yearn for in Bingtown.
Right.
And he probably chose Keffria as a young, naive person of a Bingtown family trader family to have that potential. And yes, he is kind of manipulative on his own, and he comes from a bad background of societal values, which undervalues women.
Right.
But he was raised in that. So you can kind of forgive him a little. And I'm not saying a lot, but a little for that background. He does perpetuate it.
It explains, but it does not excuse.
Exactly. And then he truly, truly thinks that his way is the only way to make money and get the family out of the debt that it has, because giving a ship over to an 18-year-old who is selfish and doesn't know how to sail is stupid. So Althea, you're dumb. I'm a proven captain.
And also he's his way is the only way that could possibly be correct. He will not even entertain anyone else's ideas, even if they were a man.
We've gone over the plenty of ways that he's an awful person, but those are the redeemable qualities of him, right? And most of it comes from his own mind.
Right.
But you can dig in and see those qualities.
Yeah.
So that's what we kind of thought early on. If you had forgotten, it's been a couple years.
Yes. But it is kind of shocking to see him in this state.
Yes.
It is really sad. I think in a lot of ways, I guess this is my opinion, and I'm not going to put that on anybody else. My opinion is it's a little bit frustrating because in a way he got what he deserved, in quotes, but it doesn't feel satisfying.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't. He's a human being and he had to suffer, and it didn't make him a better human being. It didn't make anybody else's life easier in any way. It's just bad. It doesn't feel good. And I kind of like that about it. I like that it's not cathartic. I like that we're not like, haha.
It's messy. It doesn't wrap up neatly with a bow.
And I think that's good because it isn't sort of glorifying punishing the bad. You know what I mean? Like it isn't trying to say like every time you punish a bad person, something good happens. It's not black and white like that.
Right.
And it isn't satisfying for Kyle to be in this position. And you do feel bad for him, which is frustrating because like me, if you're me reading this, I don't want to feel bad for Kyle. I don't want to be like, oh, that actually really sucks. And I like feel really bad for him and hope he heals a little bit. I don't want to feel that way. I want to just say Kyle bad. He deserves.
Like imagine if we had points of view from Regal's point of view, like when he was a kid or something.
Yeah.
It would be interesting, but you don't want to read that and feel bad for Regal as he's a kid.
That's not as satisfying. It doesn't, I don't know. It is good writing, and I think it is really important. Once again, I think a lot of really important things are done in this chapter just for human beings to read this series.
Right.
But I think it is important to show somebody getting their just desserts and then not having
it.
It doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel good. And I think that's really important to show too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah.
We had a lot of good discussions this episode, I think. So if you want to add to those, please let us know. You can email us directly at isfitzhappy.com. You can go to our website, isfitzhappy.com, or isfitzhappy.podbean.com. Find our email or any of our social medias. We are at Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, YouTube, and Reddit.
Right. And just a little heads up / reminder, we have completely stopped our...
Yeah, we deactivated our Twitter / X account.
Yes, that is gone.
So I need to remember to take that off of our websites.
Yes. So if you see somebody pretending to be us on Twitter / X, we are no longer there. We have taken everything. I've deleted / deactivated the account. I don't know the difference. I'm not a tech person. I just pressed I don't want an account anymore and they let me do it. I don't know. It disappeared for me. That's all I know. But we do not any longer have an X or Twitter account.
Yes.
And that will be the case for the foreseeable future. Mm-hmm. So just wanted to keep you guys updated with that.
Yeah. Contact us on any of the other social medias that I listed out.
Yes.
And we hope to hear from you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening.
Looking forward to see you next week. All right, now we get to go to our favorite portion of the episode, which is talking about what you guys have brought to us. And we're going to start with a comment a direct message from Peculiar Ponies. And that is on Instagram. And they have sent us a message asking, could it be the awakening / coming to power of the dragons in the ships that makes them able to reject the blood? Since by that time, Paragon and his dragons and Vivacia and Bolt have kind of merged.
Yeah, so this is probably in response to our kind of discussion and questions to each other about where did the rejecting of the blood come from? Now all of a sudden they can do it.
Right.
Because it's not discussed at all. But I do like this headcanon, because this isn't really, it's not like a tinfoil hat theory. It's like an explanation that uses in-world powers, but it's never talked about. So I like this headcanon that the dragons becoming more aware and becoming integrated with the beings a little bit more of the live ships gives them power over their memories, being able to pick and choose a little bit more, being more solidified into one being.
Yeah.
And not letting them absorb anything that comes into contact. You know, they have a little bit more solidity about them, because that's what, wasn't it Vivacia describing to Wintrow? Or no, it was through Wintrow's point of view of the slave uprising on Vivacia that we first got that view of, this is so overwhelming.
Yes.
All these people dying and the blood being spilled. So if you have a solid identity of who you are and the dragons are helping you with all their power of manipulating memories and having memories behind them, that makes sense that they can be like, no, this is who I am. The people that are spilling their life memories on me are not who I am, so I can reject that.
Yeah.
It makes sense to me.
I do like that. I think it does also sort of answer, in a weird way, it sort of answers a question that I had earlier on about why don't the dragons talk about gaining the memories of the food they eat?
Right.
And if being themselves, centered in themselves, having all those memories, they are able to pick and choose, because you don't need a dragon's memories. Like you don't need
like a deer's memories.
A dragon does not need a deer's memories or a boar or whatever they eat. So I think that's a really interesting thing to think about as well, that maybe that is just an inherent dragon ability to be able to absorb, because I know it's mentioned somewhere, I do not know where, but it is mentioned somewhere that it was a really big honor that every once in a while an elderling would have their memories taken up by a dragon. And that was like the highest honor you could get. It did not happen very often. I think it's the Rainwild Chronicles, so next Rainwild trilogy.
I know they talked about that with the Rooster Crown, that was a huge honor if you were a bard and like became immortalized in that.
But I think
that might be, I'm just saying that might be another imitation of dragon culture that they adopted, the Elderlings adopted.
Right.
So it makes sense.
So so I was thinking that, to me, that is what, I don't know, I feel like that also would help make that real, that the ships would also have that ability once they've commingled or accepted the dragon part of themselves to be able to control the memories that they allow on their ship.
Also, it makes people reading the Rainwild Chronicles breathe a little bit easier that I think it's Kahlo, the dragon, who eats Hest. So it makes you breathe a little bit easier that Hest's memories are not living on. It's just food, and you can reject it.
They're potentially have the capability to reject any memories they want, which probably is also another like all or nothing sort of thing. I don't think it's a,
But I do like that headcanon. It works. It works pretty in line with what we know about them.
Yeah.
So.
Big fan of that. So thank you, Peculiar Ponies. We really appreciate that. And then we also had a question from a newer listener, from Gil.
Yes.
Also on Instagram. And first of all, I have to share that Gil said that they picture Regal as Dr. Neocortex from Crash Bandicoot, which is so funny. And I grew up playing Crash Bandicoot, so that gave me an extra hard chuckle.
Yeah, I pictured like having seen that. I think that's more of like a Galen to me.
Okay,
like the mad scientist that's like really skinny,
a little crazy.
A little crazy, but I like the picture.
Yeah, it's very fun. Please Google him. 10 out of 10, great, very funny to think about. But it is very classically evil doctor character. Very fun. So thank you for that, Gil. But also, Gil asked us, how/why did you start making the podcast? And I think we've talked about it before. I'm not 100% sure. We absolutely could have just not.
So like Emma said, Gil is kind of early on in the podcast, and I think we talked about it at the end, the wrap-up discussion for Assassin's Quest. And I don't know if Gil's quite there yet, but it's been 100 and maybe 20 episodes since then. So we can talk about it briefly again here. So it was a long time coming to convince Emma to read these books. We had been dating for, I don't know, a year or two. No, I think it was like a couple years, because you started reading them when we were in our second apartment, I think.
No, I started reading them my last year of college.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. So like 6 months into us dating. A long time coming, guys.
Oh, I remember it took you multiple month breaks in between
each trilogy.
Yeah. So it took you like 2 years to read them, I think.
Yeah. And read all the books. Just for context, not to brag, but I'm a very fast reader, and it doesn't take me long to read a book. I just sometimes need a break in between books or trilogies if there's multiple trilogies. This is the first multi-trilogy series I've ever read.
And one of the first male point of view series that you liked.
Yeah, I've read very few male point of view.
And the Liveship Traders was the first like multi-point of view books that you kind of liked, but it took a while to get into both of the series. So it just
there were
it was a long time coming. Like just read them in 8 months and get over it with.
Because I read I think the first book in like 2 days. And
something like
the first trilogy was done in a week, I'm pretty sure. Like I got through it really fast. I actually really liked it, which surprised me.
And then you waited a long time.
And then I think I waited like 3 months. To be fair, I was in my last semester of undergrad. I was not in the mood to be reading. So I think I started that like out on a break and then went into classes and was like, I'm not doing this. I tried to read it. I distinctly remember opening the first page, seeing all the serpents talking to each other. I was like, no, I'm not doing that.
And I think after you graduated, you didn't want to start reading anything for a while either.
Exactly.
So it took a little bit to get through all 16 books.
Yes.
So for me, again, it was a little time coming here.
Long time.
Yes, a long time coming. But so you finally got through all the books and we could talk about them a little bit. And I had been listening to Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast a lot. Because it was probably my 5th time through Wheel of Time or something. And I had a lot of downtime at work where I was on my computer doing stuff. So I just listened to episodes.
I was really into Overdue podcasts. If anybody has not listened to them, please do. They're so good.
They are really good.
I also made Luke listen to them, but they basically just take books. Their tagline is something like, we read the books that you were supposed to read and then tell you about them.
I think it started with
classics.
Well, it started with books on their bookshelf that they hadn't got around to yet. And they would take turns, one person reading a book 1 week and telling the plot and everything about that to the other person. And then they would switch.
And like usually the person they were talking to had read it at one point, but it was a really long time ago.
Something like that. Yeah.
Or sometimes they hadn't read it at all. But it was it's a really fun podcast. Now I think one or both of, I think Andrew for sure has a kid. I don't know if the other one has a kid, but they now read a lot more children's book, which is really fun.
Interesting.
But
anyways,
very different from what we do.
And I think also you were into Potterless.
Yes, I was reading the chapter by chapter first time read through of Harry Potter by a grown adult man, and that was really good.
So this was at the end of 2019-ish.
Yeah.
So we started talking about like, oh, what if we did this? And then it laid to rest for a while. And then I think January we picked it up again and said like, what if we actually do this? If we actually do a podcast? And I think you were the first one who like said like, yeah, let's actually do it. Yeah. And then I got really into listening to podcasts about how to do a podcast and things like that. So I started like, hey, let's sit down and plan then.
Yeah. Which really funnily enough, this is part of our lore. We decided this in part, we had not made any posts. We had not made anything. And as we started making all of our social medias before posting any episodes, we realized that there was another new to the scene podcast group out there. Shout out Buckkeep Radio.
Yeah, they started, I think, in November, maybe, or October in 2019. So around the time that we were like coming up with the idea, but we didn't do anything about it.
Yeah, we weren't doing any research. We weren't looking for a podcast.
Yeah.
I would have at the time looked to see if there was one, and there wasn't, which is why we thought we would do one, because there were no podcasts. And then by the time we had started setting everything up,
they had like multiple episodes out. Maybe got done with the first book.
Okay, actually, no, take that back. I just looked it up, and Buckkeep Radio actually started in August of 2019.
Yeah.
And we didn't technically put out an episode till March 2020.
Right. We reserved our website and stuff in February.
Yes. So we were starting to plot things in Feb, but I definitely looked them up and didn't see anything. I looked up like Robin Hobb podcast and didn't see anything, but that also could just be because they were so new. And so they didn't have much at the time that I looked things up. So they definitely were around when I was looking. I just did not find them. Sorry, Buckkeep. Also, shout out to them. They're great. You should listen to them if you get bored with us or want something to do while you're waiting for our next episode.
Yeah, because they have finished.
They have finished.
They did in chunks of chapters.
Yeah, I think they did like 3 or 4 at a time, maybe even 5.
They started with 6, and I think they trimmed it down when it got like a little bit more dense.
Yeah.
But it's a group of people talking.
It is a group. So they're really fun.
Yeah.
I would love to meet them someday. Yeah. Very cool. We can all argue about Team Molly and Team Not Molly. I think most of them are Team Anti-Molly, so...
Emma's alone on her.
I know. It'll be me on one side and everybody else on the other.
Yeah. So, yeah, in January and February, we kind of sat down and started planning what we actually wanted to do, what we actually wanted to look like, and... I think what made you go into it and be like, oh, yeah, we should do this because you didn't see any podcasts. By the time we were planning, we were aware of Buckkeep Radio.
Yes.
When we sat down at end of January, early February, we're like, okay, these guys are doing their own thing. That's awesome. We don't want to talk non-spoilers.
Yes. That was the main takeaway.
Yes.
Was we didn't want to do. We
didn't want to police ourselves of like, oh, we can't give that away yet.
Yeah. I also did have to stop listening to them for a while because I didn't want to say anything that they were saying.
Oh, and influence yourself?
Yeah.
Right.
And so I listened to a few of their episodes to start and then was like, okay, I don't want this to influence how we do ours. I don't want this to be a copycat, and I don't want to, on accident even, because I heard it said somewhere else,
have their takes
come through and pretend like it's my own idea without realizing.
Yeah.
So I didn't listen to them until I actually haven't listened to their take on this trilogy. I wait until we're done with each trilogy to like listen up. So sorry, Buckkeep Radio. But I do like you guys. I just don't want it to influence what we do.
Just 3 years back from the cycle, every trilogy. But yeah, so we sat down and planned and had a list of names, had a list of what we wanted to accomplish, how we wanted it to sound, and with the influences that we cited, you listening to Potterless, me listening to Wheel of Time spoilers, it's very kind of similar. You go through, you give your thoughts on the chronological order of the chapter.
Yes.
And that's kind of what we wanted to do. We wanted to have a spoiler in-depth conversation about these books because that wasn't a thing for the whole podcast yet.
Yeah.
That did not exist. So we wanted to offer that space for the fans and for ourselves, because that's what we started with wanting to do. We just kind of wanted to talk about it, but in a solid way. And you were fine with a reread, and I wanted to do a reread for a while.
Yeah. I think the scariest part, honestly, about deciding to start a podcast about a book you like
is maybe not liking it.
But no, as I was always really afraid that people would listen to us and be mad because we're just 2 random people, like we're just 2 random strangers on the internet talking about our feelings. And who are we to say
talking about fictional character feelings?
Yes,
actually.
Yeah. And like sometimes we're really mean to them. And I was really scared to do this podcast only because I was afraid that coming out and talking about a book that we love. We do love this series. It may not always come across that way, but I think I can at least speak for me when I say I do love this series and I love the characters. I love Robin Hobb's writing. I think that it's such a cool book. There are things that I don't like about it, but that's the same with anything. And it was so scary for me to feel like we were taking on this position of authority of like, we know things. But then I was thinking about it and I'm like, well, all the podcasts I listen to, those are just random strangers on the internet. Those aren't like, it's the Potter list is just some like 20-something-year-old dude reading Harry Potter for the first time. I don't know him. I don't know what he does for a living. Like,
no, they're authorities. They can speak on it. We can't.
Yes, you know? It's different. It's but I think you guys actually have been, you guys being the listeners have been so amazing that it has really assuaged my fears. I will say for the first like probably full year, I could not look at any comments.
Oh yeah, I'm the keeper of all of the reviews and things like that.
Yeah, I couldn't look up reviews. I couldn't look up anything. I can't, even if if I happen to come across people talking about us on Reddit or Facebook, which happens sometimes because I'm also part of the Robin Hobb fan groups, obviously, on Facebook. Why would I have a podcast and not be? But I've seen you guys post about us, which is so sweet. And I cannot read the comments. I get so scared. Being a internet personality, whatever that means, is kind of scary to me. And you guys have made it really welcoming in a way that I really appreciate. But do know that Luke has to go through everything first before I read it to let me know if I need to read it or not.
Yeah.
So if you do ever say something really mean about me, just know I won't see it.
But if you email it, then she will. So email your direct criticisms about Emma.
Email your hate to isfitzabbey@gmail.com. And it started off with, Emma, you're lame.
So, thank you very much, Gail, for the question. We've kind of morphed that into a tangent, but that's fun sometimes. You know, we haven't talked about it for a while. But we just wanted to start and continue this podcast just as a place to talk about the books with each other and hope that other people found it entertaining and wanted to talk about it with us.
Yeah. And also I wanted an excuse to make chapter by chapter memes. Yeah. Because that is an underdeveloped market. It's really easy. I will say it is really easy to make generic memes that could fit for books or multiple chapters. It is so hard to do chapter by chapter memes sometimes because some chapters, not a lot happens. Also, sometimes they are so niche that like
only
even
sometimes a lot of them are niche.
Like 90% of them are so niche. You had to have been reading along with the chapter when you see it to understand it. Yeah. And that happens to us too. Like I'll go back and see some of the stuff I made for the first book even. And I'm like, what is that even talking about? Like, who is that? But I still make them because they're funny and I like it. Yeah. So really, I'm my target audience for those.
Yes. And again, if you don't follow us on Instagram, you don't get the memes. So follow us on Instagram. They are all the history of all of the memes are in our highlights on our profile. They are 99.9% created by Emma. I have maybe 5 ideas that I've told Emma and she's made. And I think we had people send in some of them before as well. There may be under 20 of those total throughout the whole series. For the rest, hundreds are made by Emma.
Yes, I have made well over 100. It's probably about 200 per book. And that's just the highlights. So
yeah. So thank you. That's not even the posted ones on our actual profile.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for continuing to send in memes if you have funny ideas of memes.
I love seeing the memes, and I will absolutely credit you. If you do not want to be credited, please let me know because I automatically credit people. So.
Yeah, the default would be to put your name on it.
Or if you want to send it on one account and you have a different account you want to be credited, just send me a message. I will do whatever you want. But I absolutely love sharing your guys' memes that you share to me because they are so funny.
Okay, so thank you so much. Another plug, just email us if you have thoughts. Yeah. Rate and review us if you have thoughts that you want to share with the world. We really appreciate that.
Share with the world and Luke.
Yes, and me. And maybe I will share them with Emma.
Yes. I don't know. Most of the time, the reviews I do get to read, I cry because they're so sweet. So thank you guys.
We have very, very nice reviews. Thank you, everybody who has ever reviewed us. we are very lucky to have dedicated listeners to tag along for 230 some episodes here. Yeah. So
that's a lot of time on everybody's end. So
with an average of like an hour and a half for each. Jeez.
Yeah. What are you guys doing? Get a life. I'm just kidding. We're the ones spending the hours making it. So thanks, guys. We love you. We love hearing from you. And we cannot wait to talk to you next week.